Hi, I'm Clyde Haberman of the New York Times, filling in for Sam Roberts. For the fifth time in under 4 years, Israelis will head to the polls to elect a new government. For some New Yorkers, Israel is practically the city's sixth borough. So let's discuss its political situation with New York Times correspondent Isabel Kershner, who joins us from Jerusalem. Welcome, Isabel, and thank you for joining us. 5 elections in 4 years is an awful lot, obviously, even for Israel. Is the political system in Israel simply broken?
Well, I don't think it's the system that's broken. It's certainly representative. It gives everybody a voice. There is criticism of the fact that coalitions are so unstable and made up of small parties
Right.
who often hold the balance of power and have totally outrageously over, been over empowered as a result. But then everybody does have their voice, and there aren't many more political systems that people can come up with that would do that job in a society like the one we have here. But I think what we are seeing is the impasse is just an absolute illustration of the political divide in the country, and the fact that the country is kind of split half and half, and very much a function of the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu, who is the central character
Right.
in all of this, whether he's in power or out of power, is not letting go and is not letting the system move forward, because the country is basically split over him. So many people will tell you that if he were to remove himself from the scene, then things would move forward. There would be no problem forming a stable government. But because he is still there and he is the controversial figure
Right.
around which all of this is revolving, we just don't seem to be able to get beyond this terrible impasse.
I was going to ask this a bit later, but as long as you've mentioned Netanyahu, let me ask it now. What is his enduring appeal, clearly for many, many Israelis? I'll confess I don't get it. When I was the correspondent there, as you know, for the Times for about 4.5 years, and I found him eminently untrustworthy, quite frankly. Perhaps I shouldn't admit it so bluntly, but I did. And yet he served longer than any Israeli prime minister in history, and I don't get it. Can you explain it?
Well, half of Israel doesn't get it, but
Yeah, but there's
the
another
other
half
half,
that counts. So,
the other half, he does have a tremendous appeal. Look, first of all, there's the age-old divide here between the right and the left,
sure.
and to some extent, the Ashkenazim and the Mizrahim, and where their political loyalties traditionally have lain. And I think a lot of Netanyahu's base is just so loyal to him because that base would be loyal to whoever the Likud leader was, the leader of his party, the conservative Likud. It's almost a continual protest vote against the old elites of the socialist labor movement that ran the country for so many of its first decades. And there is a kind of ethos within the Likud and among Likud voters that you remain loyal to the party leader, whoever that leader is. And he has also just been incredibly ruthless, I think, over the years about sidelining competition within his party. Anybody who's not loyal to
Mm.
him finds themselves out. And he's just been he's nicknamed the wizard or the magician for his political wizardry. And that's part of the recipe of his endurance, I think.
Yeah. Traditionally, security, national security is the number one issue for Israeli voters. I assume it still is. What are the dominant issues, that aside?
Well, in terms of national security, there's always the two perennials, which are Iran and the potential threat of a nuclear Iran. which is the only really existential threat on the horizon for Israel these days, and the Palestinian question, which of course remains unresolved and stagnant. And Netanyahu, I think, on the Iran front, we see Iran is closer than ever after Netanyahu's long rule to being able to attain a nuclear weapon if it wanted to. We're hearing predictions now of, the ability to cross the threshold within a few weeks in terms of uranium enrichment if Iran decided to go that route. And on the Palestinian issue, as much as the Israeli side is reluctant to engage at this point, the Palestinian side is also extremely weak and divided. And so there's not much happening there. So that's really not so much on the agenda. It hasn't been first and foremost on the agenda for the last few elections because people just don't see any possibility of any, dramatic movement.
If I can interrupt, are Palestinians fearful of being sort of left behind as Israel reaches out to various Arab states that would have kept it, way at a distance, and there's more of an embrace, not a full embrace, but are Palestinians becoming to realize that maybe the bus is leaving and they're not on it?
I think absolutely they have been bypassed. The Abraham Accords of last year, which saw normalization and full diplomatic relations come about between Israel, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Morocco.
Right.
And we're seeing these, smaller gestures on the part of Saudi Arabia. In the past, this could never have happened without significant progress on resolving the Palestinian question. But yes, they've been bypassed. And the initial reaction among the Palestinians has been one of anger at the Emirates and the Emiratis, anger at, at the world in general for being sidelined, and of course anger at Israel. But I'm not yet seeing any great desire on the part of the Palestinians to rethink and reset and say, okay, how can we play this to our advantage and perhaps get the Emiratis more on our side to use their leverage with the Israelis. And when you speak to the Emiratis about it and say, why don't you use your leverage a bit more with the Israelis for the Palestinian question, they'll say, well, we're waiting for the Palestinians to come and ask. Right. So, that's where it's at.
Yeah. What about Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian leader? He's 87 years old. One doesn't usually get better from being 87. Is there a clear successor to him, or does chaos loom once he goes, whether he simply retires or frankly dies?
Yeah, we're not expecting him to retire.
Yeah, no, I didn't think so.
But unless absolutely incapacitated. But he has been promoting one particular figure in the last few months. That's Hussein al-Sheikh, a Fatah leader. Unfortunately, Hussein al-Sheikh is incredibly unpopular among the Palestinians. I doubt.
That. A small detail. And then, of course, you have...
A little detail, yes, a little blip. So, he's been mainly charged in the last few years with liaison with Israel as his job. He's been the civil liaison minister. He's very unpopular. He's certainly not a shoo-in for Abbas after the Abbas era is over. And I think we will, we'll see instability. There are all sorts of predictions. I mean, we also have predictions of 10 years of chaos if and when Arafat died. But after he died, actually, there was a fairly smooth transition. It's possible that this time, too, there could be a group of people who come together and split the roles between them, whether it's the head of PLO or the head of the Palestinian National Authority or the head of the Fatah party. And then, of course, you have the Hamas leadership in Gaza. You could see some kind of effort to create a stable transition, but it's anybody's guess
Right.
who at this point will come out on top.
Very quickly, if I may, we have very little time left, maybe a minute. You recently had a very interesting piece about tapes that were revealed of the Nazi figure Adolf Eichmann and just his raw anti-Semitism and desire to indeed eliminate Europe's Jewry. Has there been a lingering reaction in Israel to this, or is the country to some degree well beyond the Holocaust?
I think it made a big impact. I think people found it fascinating. It was the missing link from the Eichmann trial of 61 years ago. And, it was the evidence that wasn't available at the time to the prosecutors. So just hearing Eichmann in his own voice, admitting or boasting about things that he had totally denied during the trial, it was seen as quite an impactful series. It certainly was well received here. But yes, I mean, to an extent, people are over the Holocaust. But on the other hand, we're very much at that stage where the generation of survivors is really fading out. And I think we saw during the Biden visit here, the emotion of Biden's meeting with two elderly Holocaust survivors at Yad Vashem. And the whole country was just melting over that. There is still a lot of sentiment and a lot of interest and a lot of concern that the younger generation, both in Israel and around the world, should also be exposed to these historical truths. And therefore, that series was very, very well received.
Good. Thank you, Isabel Kirschner. I'm sure you have a lot to do, and the elections will be coming up very soon. We'll see what happens.
Thank you, Clay.
Thank you very much. Up next, if you thought life is a puzzle, let me introduce you to someone who makes puzzles her life. A growing business is catering to a new generation of news consumer, whether it's a news quiz, crossword puzzle, or Wordle. This past year, at least 28 million people played one of the New York Times games that takes local, national, and global events and gamifies it. There's a word for you, gamifies. The Times receives as many as 200 puzzle submissions each week for nearly 2 years. My next guest has been editorial director of the New York Times' puzzle section, Everdeen Mason. Welcome.
Hi.
One of my favorite parts of the pay. I've been doing a crossword puzzle since, more years than I'm ever going to admit to. But the Times obviously has a multiplicity of games. That's a good crossword puzzle word too, I guess. Multiplicity of games these days, both in print and online. What accounts for this explosion of interest? Money is probably one factor, but that aside, something's going on.
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things. I mean, one, the pandemic. The pandemic happened, people needed things to do, especially during the early days when we weren't sure how long it was going to be. Like the indefiniteness of it was still very up in the air.
Right.
And so games in general, not just New York Times, games kind of provided people not just something to do, but an outlet to connect with each other. Something that we've been talking a lot on the team about is that people do play games in a weird way to improve their relationships with other people, right? Like people think about the explosion of like the game Among Us, which is like more of a video game where people are going online to play, or video games like all the Epic games and stuff like that. But, people play Scrabble online together. They play Word with friends.
Right.
With the crossword, people are posting their times in group chats. I think what made Wordle in particular so perfect for this moment is actually the share functionality of Wordle, right? You can share how you did to like spark conversation without actually spoiling the game. And so I think there is a real desire for people to not just have something to do, but have something to do with each other and have something to talk about that's not, global events.
Yeah, fair enough, which can be pretty depressing.
Yeah.
I was going to ask about Wordle later, but as long as you mentioned it, the explosion of users, it went from, basically a closet thing for a handful of people to hundreds of, I think hundreds of thousands of people, at least tens of thousands for sure. When you say people can compare, is it a pure competitive thing? I solved it in one, I solved it in 2 attempts rather than 4, or is there something more complex going on?
I think it's more complex than that. I mean, I think some of it is being able to be like, oh, look, but you can also debate about it. Like, I mean, Wordle is essentially a guessing game, right? And you have a limited number of tries. So just because I got it in 3 doesn't mean that you didn't get it in 1.
Can I just interrupt to explain for readers who may not be that familiar with it,
Yeah.
that it's a 5-letter word, and you've basically got to guess what those 5 letters are in order. And
Yes.
so I guess the first word that you try is sort of a stab in the dark. No? Yeah.
Yeah, and you get 6 tries, and you have to get it in that amount of time. And every word that you get, it tells you whether, yellow means that the letter is in the word, but it's not in the right place.
That's right.
Green means that you've got it in the right place. So you can see how it can get, and you have that kind of like feeling of like, oh my gosh, like I'm so close. Like my mom texts me how she did in Wordle every day, actually, which I think is really adorable. Because she's a
She any
Sudoku
good at
gal. She's getting better. She's been repeating 3s.
Okay. Oof.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, but she's a Sudoku gal, right? So Wordle is a new, especially English is her second language. I mean, she's been here for a long time, but she's more comfortable with a math game than a word game, but she's been loving it, so. But it's very accessible. I think that's the other secret. It's super accessible. Like the crossword, it feels like there's a higher barrier to entry. I think a lot of people can be intimidated by it, or they think that it's like only for super smart, genius people. But Wordle is like very accessible. Like anybody can pick it up and play it and put it down.
Your job as editorial director of games is what? Do you look at each puzzle? I mean, there are so many. There's the spelling bee, which I also enjoy doing, and there's I forget what it's called, but you have a
Vertex?
Vertex is one, and of course a traditional crossword puzzle. Do you look at each one and pass on it, or is, let's say, the crossword puzzle, which is the oldest of them all, is that Will Shortz, the puzzle editor, and not so much you?
So the crossword puzzle is actually very much a team effort. So we are all involved in that process. So my role as editorial director, I originated this role. You have to understand the games team started really small. It was like literally Will, and then he hired Joel and Sam. Sam does the spelling bee. Joel does our minis. They're both amazing brains. And then as that team expanded, they built out the digital product, and then they were like, wait a minute, we need somebody to like make sure this process works. So in addition to like working with them on workshopping editorial standards, kind of being the tiebreaker on things, I also do a lot of process stuff. The crossword we just moved to a digital first editing pipeline like this year. It took me,
Meaning?
like we edit digitally instead of like they were literally manually typesetting on like local files. Will had printouts of every puzzle in file cabinets.
Like, still my heart.
Yes.
I love that.
Yes. So
okay, but that's gone.
Yeah, but over the last year and a half, I mean, there's a ton of mistakes that can happen. Puzzles get lost. Not like mistakes. Will's, again, these brains are amazing, but like puzzles get lost, or things can be really slow. Or it just makes it harder for them. So really what I'm trying to do is maximize the amount of time they get to do the creative fun stuff, right? Editing. They love working with constructors, like talking to each other about words, debating clues, right? And less time with the actual like filing of things or printing out things or typesetting. Like I don't know, it's 2022. We can automate a lot of that stuff. So it's been a lot of kind of inputting all the processes that they do and then trying to figure out how I can streamline it so they can just do only the fun stuff. So with the crossword in particular, I help with like Maybe's reviews, where we review all of the puzzles that we're thinking of considering. I test puzzles every week. We hold editorial workshops, and we kind of talk about, hey, in the last month or so, we've gotten a lot of feedback about these kinds of clues, or we keep getting feedback from testers or the audience on this thing. Do we want to talk about how we think about this word or how we want to think about it in the future. So I do a lot of facilitating of conversation. And with the other games, it requires some of this, but a little bit less.
The figure I mentioned in my introduction about as many as 200 submissions, just sticking to the crossword puzzle.
Yes.
That figure astounded me. I didn't realize it was that high, and I noticed that occasionally you imposed a moratorium of we're not taking submissions for a week or two. So who wades through the 150 to 200 that you get a week to say this is good, this is not so good, this is a good Monday puzzle, which is relatively easy, this is a good Saturday puzzle, which is supposed to be much harder. Is that you?
No. So that is primarily the puzzle editors. So we now have 4 people wading through. So Winna Liu, Tracy Bennett, and then Joel Fagliano and Sam Mazursky. They do mail every week. And they kind of there's some puzzles they're like, we're going to reject these. We know that we are. And then there's puzzles that they're like, oh, we like things about this and we don't, and they make notes. Then every week we have what we call a maybes review, and we're all in that review. And they go through everything that was put in that pending bucket, and we go through, Will reads the fill, people make their case about why they like a puzzle, why they don't like a puzzle, whether we think that we can get it to a high standard. Sometimes we're like, okay, this person is actually they would be a debut. This is their first submission with us, and they're so close, can we put in a little bit of effort to get them there? And so that's where we have that conversation. And then there's where we're like, okay, yes, we think this is a Monday or a Tuesday.
Right.
No. So that part we do together. So we kind of boil, let's say it's 200 a week. That might get boiled down to 20 or 30 that then we can review. And then we do accept a very few because we just have
Clearly,
so many.
you only have 7.
Yeah, yes.
And I presume there's a certain topicality that you want too. There might be a 4th of July themed one, let's say, or...
Yeah, and we schedule pretty far out in advance now. So we're scheduled about 3 months in advance.
Okay.
That doesn't mean we don't move things around, but we schedule pretty far out. And then also, as we get closer, so, we may accept it and schedule it, and then the editing process starts a couple months later. So we may need to be oh, actually, this puzzle is a little awkwardly timed now, or, the conversation has changed. But we tend to have it's kind of an ongoing tension where I think for a long time, one of the standards was timelessness for accepting a puzzle, but we're kind of shifting towards a little bit away from that because news moves too fast, and with the internet, language is too malleable. New terms, new phrases, new meanings of words happen so fast that I don't know that we can necessarily say this word is going to be a word people use in this way for decades.
Yeah, I would assume you don't want to just do whatever the hot word of the moment is among 18-year-olds. That's a
Yes.
What makes someone good at solving, let's say, puzzles in general, but the crossword puzzle again, to stick to that? Are there consistent personality and intellectual traits that we can observe in a good puzzle solver?
Well, I think anecdotally, we talk about people who do computer science, people are into music and math, people who are good. It's almost like another language, right? Yeah. So the clues are written in such a way to kind of help you solve the puzzle. So if you have a question mark at the end of the clue, it means one thing versus you have to watch the tenses, you have to think about the wordplay of it. So it's really more language recognition and pattern recognition, I would think. And then some knowledge about word structure, right? So if you're filling out the crossword and you have blanks and you have an A and an E, some people are able to narrow that down and be okay, A and E together narrows it down to this cluster of words. So there's a couple of different approaches to solving. One thing we do talk a lot about when we're constructing is the ratio of kind of trivia to wordplay kind of thing, because I think one of the hallmarks of our puzzles is you can't totally just trivia your way through it. But that's one entry point.
When you say trivial, you mean?
where if you just know the answer to a piece of trivia. So, for example, I know like if I'm gonna pretty much always get the pop culture ones, and that's gonna be like a
Those are the ones that kill me.
yeah, that's going to be an entry point for me. But for other people, it's going to be like geography or sports. For some people, it's going to be they just really understand like that word play language. You know, so like for example, it took me a really long time to understand like rebuses and like how to do a rebus. So a rebus is when you can put more than one letter in a square, essentially.
Are
right?
you good at crosswords?
I'm getting better. I am now up to a Wednesday solve.
Okay.
When I started, I was just like a Monday solver.
Oh.
Yes. I'm also a Sudoku gal.
Okay. We only don't have quite a minute left. Just, I've always been curious. Would somebody who's good at puzzles make a good spy? Is there reason to believe that the brain works in that way in terms of what's behind it all?
Okay, I'm gonna honestly say no because I think there's more that goes into being a spy than code breaking.
Okay.
But I do think you could, if you can break code, you can probably solve a crossword puzzle.
All right. There you go. So we know where the next spies are coming from. The New York Times readers. Thank you, Everdeen Mason.
Thank you.
For everyone here at CUNY TV, I'm Clyde Haberman of the New York Times. Thank you for watching.